Well, we want to move to another critically important issue in the region, and that is the ongoing issues in Syria, which, of course, have many different implications for Palestine, for Lebanon, for the entire region, really for the entire world, given the importance of that region. And we are very, very honored to get into this, to have with us Josh Landis, the Sandra Mackey Chair and Director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Landis, thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure being with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. And there's a lot of things happening. It's tough for me to even know where to start. I probably should have just let Rania start. But, we've had these trilateral talks happening in Paris, the United States, the Syrian foreign minister, the Israeli strategic affairs minister. Some people are saying it's the U.S. is trying to push normalization between Syria and Israel. Some are saying they're just trying to calm down the tensions between Syria and Israel over southern Syria and the issues happening with the Druze population. I wonder how you see these talks, what the U.S. goal is here, and what some of the implications could be.
Well, the U.S. I think is fighting on two fronts. We have the policy that was pronounced by President Trump and his special envoy to Syria, Tom Barak, who is the ambassador to Turkey, who embraced Sharaa, the new president, and really gave them carte blanche. Said, we're lifting sanctions, we want you to stabilize, this is your big chance. At the same time, once they cracked down on the Jebel Druze, the Druze region, that's 3%, a minority, heterodox Shiite minority in the south of Syria, near the Golan Heights, the Israelis said, we are protecting the Druze because we have Druze in Israel, and bombed the Ministry of Defense in Damascus, threatened the president of Syria, and really stopped the Syrian government in its tracks from consolidating its power over the rest of Syria, and stopped this presidential move to integrate the Jebel Druze, to destroy its autonomous regime and integrate it into larger Syria, which Barak, the special envoy, had said was a goal of America. But just yesterday and the day before, we saw Barak in Paris, where there was a special meeting with the foreign minister of Syria. And who was he embracing? He was embracing the Druze leader of Israel. And Israel was there meeting with Sharaa's foreign minister, saying, we want a special corridor to resupply the Jebel Druze in Syria, which was completely undermine Damascus's effort to spread its control over the whole of Syria. So America's policy is run into a big speed bump, which is Israel. And today there are two counter policies that are running side by side. There is the expressed Trump policy, which was, we want to support Damascus. And there is the Israeli policy, which is, we don't like the new rulers in Damascus. We want to keep them weak. We want to keep Syria divided, and we are going to protect the Druze and not let them integrate. And we'd like the Kurds to remain independent as well in the north. So those are two diametrically opposed policies. One is integration of a sovereign Syria with Damascus leading everything. And the other is a much more federal, decentralized system that Israel is pushing. And the United States is caught in between. And I think Trump will be caught in between too.
It's interesting to see how much daylight there is between what the U.S. wants, with the U.S. vision for Syria versus the Israeli vision for Syria. But just to zoom in, Josh, I mean, it's not Ahmad al-Sharaa is not doing himself any favors in terms of trying to unify, because forces that are involved in his government have been complicit in carrying out these massacres against minorities, first on the coast against Alawites a few months ago, and now in Sweden, and it's pushed the Kurds to recently have this minority conference to try to maintain some sort of autonomy for these various regions, which goes against what Ahmad al-Sharaa himself wants, which is one undivided Syria. So I'm curious if you can talk a bit about, what you think is going on in the thinking here. Is this somebody who is a former al-Qaeda leader who's unable to shed his ideology? Is it somebody who doesn't have control over his own forces, who, investigation and after investigation has found that forces, again, in his own security forces, are involved in these horrific massacres that we're seeing play out, that are in fact leading to the disintegration of this country if this were to continue.
Well, Rania, that is the million-dollar question, and I've been wrestling with it. Let me start with an anecdote. This is an anecdote that takes place, told by an Alawite who was caught up in the massacres in March. Two of his sons and a bunch of his other family members were killed in front of his eyes. And these were regime soldiers sent in by the president to take charge of the region. There had been some Alawites had shot some security people, and he called Syrians a general alert in the country to go to the coast and to stick it to the Alawites, essentially. Now, he claims that he only wanted, transitional justice. But what happened, this story will be, I think, important in the sense that we were debriefing this guy, trying to take his story down, and he explained he had been beaten up badly, a 62-year-old Alawite man, and then they lifted him up and they forced him to watch these soldiers, 15 soldiers, as they shot his two sons and other family members in front of his eyes. And when they had finished, he asked them, he said, "Why are you doing this?" And they said that this leading officer said to him, "Your dead bodies are our stairway to heaven."
Wow.
And then, so this is important for two reasons. One is these were regime soldiers, not some wild militia. Two, transitional justice. When you hear the word transition, and Westerners hear the word transitional justice, they think, oh, we've got some kind of police force that's going in to find Alawites who are members of Assad's regime who committed crimes. And they're going to go in front of a judge or a jury or something, and they're going to be tried for their crimes, and they're going to be punished. But what these soldiers see as transitional justice is God's justice. It's a religious justice because they see these people as unbelievers who are heterodox, who are not Muslims, and they should be punished. Now, when these soldiers had to decide whether they were going to kill a 62-year-old man who had just watched his family be killed, they dragged him in front of what they called their sheikh. So the commanding officer of this unit in the Syrian army was called the sheikh. That's a religious title. He was a 35-year-old, and they said, should we kill this guy? And then the guy began to quiz him on Islam and said, what is the Shahada? Can you tell me what it, repeat this? And then how many rak'ah do you do? How many different prayers at different times of the day to see if he was a Muslim or not a Muslim? Fortunately, this guy knew all the answers. But so then the guys waved him and said, okay, he can live. But the point here is, once again, this was a religious test about his guilt and whether he deserved death or not. This was nothing to do with his activities under the old regime, crimes, or anything else. It was purely a religious thing. And the question is then, does Sharaa condone that? And he is al-Qaeda. He spent 20 years in the trenches preaching this stuff. Now, even if he wants to reverse it, the new police force he's built, we have videos of a few of their graduation ceremonies. And in one ceremony, you see the commanding officer who is graduating these new cadets, let's say 50 cadets that are graduating in to become police, and they ask them, they say, Dasturina, Dasturina. He yells at his crowd, what is our constitution? And the cadets respond to him. They say, al-Quran, al-Quran. The Quran is our constitution. Then he says, Sabilina, Sabilina. What is our way? And they chant back, al-Jihad. Jihad is our way. So if the indoctrination of this new Syrian force is Islamic, it's the same indoctrination that al-Qaeda was giving to their forces. And so it's little wonder that when these troops come into a village of heterodox unbelievers from their point of view, and that's what happened in the Jebel Druze. People were asked, what is your religion? And then they were shot. And we saw many of those videos. And, and you, if I'm not wrong, are partly Druze or maybe all Druze. I don't know.
My family is Lebanese Druze.
And you had a very ugly experience recently, I know, which you put on Facebook and I read, and my heart went out to you but that is the sort of thing that family after family in Syria has been experiencing. They're called pigs, they're called unbelievers, they're called apostates, and then they're shot. And they're treated with complete contempt by this military and police force. Now, is that a mistake? It's hard to believe that it's a mistake because it's so deeply ingrained in these new forces, and they're not embarrassed to do it, and they do it over and over again. And the president has not come out and said, you can't do that. We're not a religious state anymore, because he is a religious state. In the new constitution that he promulgated, he states the state, the government respects God's religions. And he said, El Diyan al-Samawi. That's our heavenly religions. And the only heavenly religions in the eyes of these rulers are Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, interestingly enough, because they are Ahl al-Kitab. And the Druze, the Ismailis, the Alawites are not considered. They're considered to be man-made religions that show man's evil and animal desires. And in the Syrian school textbooks that were used until about 8 years ago, it says, how do you treat an atheist or a pagan? They say you have to kill them or convert them. And those are the two alternatives. And Druze are considered to be pagans because, as are Alawites and Ismailis, because they don't just worship Allah, they worship Ali, or in the case of Druze, al-Hakim, and so forth. And so they consider them pagans. And that's, how do you overcome that?
Mm. Well, it brings me to the next question I want to ask you before we let you go here. I mean, is it even possible with this sort of government sitting in Damascus to even maintain a unitary state in Syria as we know it, given all of the various different fault lines and their ideology?
Well, there's not a unitary state. The Kurds own almost a third of Syria, everything north of the Euphrates. The Druze have an autonomous government in the south. Israel has said that the Syrian army cannot deploy south of Damascus, and it's going to protect the Druze. So, and Turkey has its troops in a hunk of the north. So the country is not unified, and it's hard to see how it's going to become unified without respecting its citizens, because the Kurds, who own a big hunk of territory, which has most of the oil, a lot of agriculture and water, are saying, we don't want to do this because we don't trust you, because you're going to do to us what you have done to the Druze and the Alawites. And they have good reason to believe so. So this is, now it's possible he could do it anyway. He could just use force and marshal this jihadist forces behind him and destroy them. And Turkey would support him if he does that. So everything rests on America right now. And so all eyes are looking at Washington, D.C. Will Washington protect the Kurds, or will it kick them to the curb? And that's the real question that we're all trying to find out. And 4 congressmen just went. I'm an Oklahoman. One of the Druze that was killed in Jebel Druze was an Oklahoman American citizen. And our senator went to Damascus and met and shook hands and embraced. Shut up. But I know the Druze community here in Oklahoma, which is not teeny, are up in arms, and they're trying to convince him, you can't just give him carte blanche. because they'll massacre us. And so this is a very important question, and Americans are divided on it. Of course, most Americans don't have a clue what's going on. So shows like yours today are very important. And it's a time when America's making that decision, and every congressman is going to have to figure out where they fall on this question.
Well, very high stakes, a lot to follow, and we really appreciate you joining us here and helping us sort through it all. Dr. Josh Landis, Director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma, thank you so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Well, thank you both. Renya, so it was a pleasure.